Today I will be showing you how to latch hook. Latch hook is a knot tying technique to create a shag or fringe-like texture with yarn or fabric. It's a really great way to use up yarn or fabric scraps if you have them laying around. Latch hook is done with a hook to pile loops of yarn onto a woven base like this. And it's really secure. These are not coming out. And it's so soft, so it's no surprise that this was used originally to create rugs. The materials you need are grid paper, pencil, and black marker for the design making, a mesh or woven base, latch hook, yarn or fabric, scissors, and cardboard. Here is the woven or mesh background. It's in a grid structure, so grid paper is really easy to make a design with. To begin your design, grab your grid paper and pencil and sketch out a simple shape. Next, shade in the grid squares along your sketch to define your shape. I recommend using a pixel art picture as your reference. I used a heart that has a black outline and a pink heart with a white background as mine. Overlay your mesh background onto your grid paper so that the shaded squares line up with the squares in your mesh. Then take your black marker and make marks onto your mesh so that you know where the design is. A latch hook and a crochet hook look pretty similar. They both have this hook shape to hook on to yarn. What's different with a latch hook compared to a crochet hook is this latching mechanism. This latching mechanism is what's going to help us tie some really strong knots onto our mesh background. For my heart design, I'm using 3 colors: white for the background, hot pink for the heart, and black for the outline. In order to fill up my entire mesh canvas like my example, I'm going to need a lot of these little yarn strips. I can cut my yarn strips one by one, but that's going to take forever and it's going to be pretty boring. This is where my cardboard trick comes in handy. I have this cardboard that I cut to be about 2 inches. I'm going to fold it in half to create prongs or a peace sign. Then I'm going to take my yarn, I'm going to wrap it around. Note, I started with my yarn on the top. I'm going to wrap. I'm going to end with my yarn on the top. See how it started on the top and it's going to end on the top. I'm going to cut my yarn, bring my yarn back up to the top, and I'm going to take my scissors and slip them in between the 2 pieces of cardboard and cut my yarn. Then you have a quick and easy way to make a bunch of yarn strips. I'm going to continue using my cardboard to cut enough yarn strips for all 3 of my colors. What if I forget that my yarn started on the top and I cut it off at the bottom? It's not a big deal. You're going to create a little bit of inconsistency with your yarn length this way. Note, this one is much smaller than all of the rest. It's not a big deal. You didn't waste any yarn. You could still use the smaller scrap. It's just if you want a bit more consistency with the length of your yarn scrap, make sure that you cut your yarn off on the same ends. So if you start on the top, cut them off at the top. If you start at the bottom, cut them off at the bottom. Look, take one of your yarn strips and fold it in half and slip it onto your hook. I keep it close to the base of my hook near the handle, and I slip the hook through the mesh so that the hook and latch are on the opposite side of the mesh than your yarn and handle. You're going to wrap your yarn under your latch and onto the hook and gently pull through. Once when it's pulled through, you'll note that you've created a tied-on knot, so go ahead and tighten that so it's nice and secure. This is where I mess up. Only one of my 2 yarn tails is caught on the hook and the other is on the side. When I pull it through and go to tighten my knot, it comes undone easily. So it's important to make sure that your hook catches both of the yarn before you pull it through. I've attached all my black yarn for my heart outline, and I decided to try an experiment with yarn height. So I cut my black yarn now so it's shorter than my pink and white. Now I'm going to attach the rest of my colors to finish the heart and the background. Almost done. I've attached all of the yarn to my mesh backing, but my yarn needs to be trimmed. Remember my experiment from earlier where I cut my black yarn to be a little bit shorter because I wanted my end design to have a little bit of variation in height, like my pink and my white yarn to be the same height, just a little bit longer than the black. This is where this comes into play. I'm going to start with my scissors and I'm going to trim the tops of my yarn, the tips of my yarn off until I get the desired height that I want. I just eyeball it. You can measure it if you'd like, but something to keep in mind is you can always keep taking away, but you can't grow it back. So if you cut off too much yarn, you're out of luck. So I recommend just cutting a little bit at a time until you get your desired height.